One fact for every original Pokemon episode, ranging from the episode where the surprise Pikachu meme comes from, to the professor who is responsible for all the Pokedex entries that don't make any sense, to one of the only episodes in the entirety of the anime that has Pokemon cards in it. Let's do this. Pokemon, I Choose You. In the first episode of the anime, Ash reveals his favorite starters in order. He states that he likes Squirtle the most, then Bulbasaur, and then Charmander. Pokemon Emergency. This episode shows a green-colored Pidgey inside of a cuckoo clock. And keep in mind, this was before shiny Pokemon even existed, so I wonder if there are green Pidgey in the Pokemon world. Also, Legendary Arcanine here. Ash catches a Pokemon. For the longest time, this episode held the record for the lowest number of human characters that appear, with the characters being Ash, Misty, Jessie, and James. It wasn't until 1013 episodes later that this record was broken by the episode Guiding and Awakening, which featured only 3 human characters, Ash, Nanu, and Acerola. Challenge of the Samurai. This episode marks the first and possibly only time that we see a Pokemon being unalived on screen, where it shows a Metapod being sliced by a pincer. Although this was really imagined by Ash and didn't really happen, so it probably doesn't count. Showdown in Pewter City. In this episode, there's a poster advertising the Pokemon League that uses the type symbols from the trading card game. And this is one of only 5 times in the entirety of the anime where it references the TCG. And if you're wondering, the other times are in the Japanese opening for the original series, in the Japanese episode Bad to the Bone where James has a Dark Primate card in his possession, in the second Pokemon movie where Lawrence III has an Ancient Mew card, and in the Japanese episode Pearls Are Spoink's Best Friend where James looks through his Pokemon cards to identify a Spoink, which is pretty wholesome. Clefairy and the Moonstone. This episode features perhaps the most improbable event in all of Pokemon history, which is the fact that every single one of these Clefairy landed a Hyper Beam using the move Metronome. And from the scene right here, we can see that there are around 18 Clefairy using the move, which would mean that the odds of this happening would have been a 1 and this number right here, which is a 13 with 195 zeros after it. Talk about plot armor. The Water Flowers of Cerulean City. The Turkish title of this episode is pretty hilarious, because the literal translation for water flower literally means chickenpox. So when said in full, the title is really The Chickenpox of Cerulean City, which is horrifying, but funny. The Path to the Pokemon League. At the end of this episode, Ash and AJ part ways and agree to meet at a future Pokemon League competition. But guess what? They never did, so Ash and AJ are liar! The School of Hard Knocks. This is the only episode that Ash falls for a girl in the entirety of the anime. So basically this last gazelle is the chosen one. Bulbasaur and the Hidden Village. This is the episode where the surprise Pikachu meme comes from. It was during when Ash was trying to capture Bulbasaur. You see it? Surprise Pikachu face. And before we continue, this video is sponsored by HelloFresh. Yo, FDXD here, and I gotta say, I've been a big fan of HelloFresh for years. They started delivering to Kepler 6 about 20 Clarisecs ago, and man, Michael Clark and I fell in love with their recipes. Oh, I didn't know they delivered to Kepler 6. That's like 20 light years from here. That's cool. But yeah, if you're someone who's trying to save money, eat better, or stress less, HelloFresh was made just for you. Because they assemble fresh ingredients to deliver right to your door with easy to read recipes. Like, look at this. I can totally read these instructions without being a gourmet chef and be able to cook something awesome out of it. And the food you make is just delicious. Oh yeah, I love their food. And you know what else I love? Breakfast. Because right now, if you sign up using the link down below in the description, you will literally get free breakfast for life. With every box you get, you will get 1 free breakfast with your meals. And I gotta say, that is a pretty awesome deal. That is awesome. And it looks like they offer quick and easy meals, healthy meals, meals with a lot of protein, or meals conscious of calorie counting. They really have it all. So hey, if you want to try HelloFresh, use my link down below in the description or use my code and get free breakfast for life. 1 breakfast item per box while subscription is active. And this is coming from me directly. I can vouch for HelloFresh. I've used them and they're great. And I even still have their recipes. So click that link down below and sign up and get that breakfast. And with that, let's get back into the video. Charmander, the stray Pokemon. Damien from this episode has a completely different backstory in the Let You Tell a Pikachu manga. Instead of being a bad trainer who abandons his Charmander, he actually gets into an accident that put him into a coma. And eventually he awakens and is reunited with Charmander. Here comes the Squirtle Squad. The English dub of the anime hides a lot of unalive threads from the Japanese version. Because in this episode, when Team Rocket threatens to dye Missy's hair purple, they're actually threatening to unalive her. Also, when Ash expresses his need to get a super potion for Pikachu, in the Japanese version, he adds that Pikachu will literally die if he doesn't. Mystery at the Lighthouse. Apparently, the door to Bill's lighthouse can predict the future, because as you can see, Mewtwo is shown on the top left of it. But at this point in time, Mewtwo hadn't even been cloned yet. So maybe Bill was the true mastermind behind Mewtwo. Electric Shock Showdown. In the Japanese version of this episode, Lieutenant Surge uses English curse words where Pikachu uses agility. Just listen.
Got them! Raichu!
He also says this in English.
Congratulations, winner Satoshi, Pikachu.
Which is a pretty cool reference to him being American. Battle Aboard the St. Anne. This episode features one of the shortest lived Pokemon that Ash has ever owned in the anime, with the Pokemon being his Raticate that he had for a whopping 6.5 minutes, since he ended up trading it back for his Butterfree. Pokemon Shipwreck. This episode aired just one day after the English release of Pokemon Red and Blue, which I would say is a pretty big deal. Island of the Giant Pokemon. James mentions in this episode that he received Coughing as a Christmas present, and it so happens in Pokemon Masters EX that he reveals that Coughing was given to him by Giovanni, which means that Giovanni gave James a Coughing for Christmas, which is surprisingly wholesome. Beauty and the Beach. This episode has a lot of cool facts. For one, this is the first episode that was banned worldwide because of this scene. For two, in the original airing of the Japanese version, there's a subliminal frame showing Misty and Ash holding a sign that says Japan's #1 best. And for three, the Japanese Who's That Pokemon segment featured a character rather than a Pokemon, which is pretty interesting. Tentacool and Tentacruel. This episode was banned not only once, but twice. The first time it was banned was right after because Tentacruel is seen demolishing skyscrapers. And then the second time it was banned was right after since it shows a city being flooded with water. The Ghost of Maiden's Peak. This episode features a Venusaur and a Blastoise doing a fusion dance from Dragon Ball, where they become a Venusoise, which is pretty dang awesome. Missed opportunity for a Paradox Venusaur, I'd say. Bye Bye Butterfree. The title of this episode, Bye Bye Butterfree, is based on the text that appears when you release a Pokemon in the games, which says bye bye and the Pokemon that you're releasing. Abra and the Psychic Showdown. This is the only episode in the entirety of the anime to feature a Warp Tile. You know, those things that teleport you in Sabrina's gym. The Tower of Terror. This is the first episode where Ash dies. And yes, I said the first episode because he dies another 5 times in the entirety of the anime. And I made a YouTube short if you're curious about the other times. Haunter vs. Kadabra. This is the episode where Pikachu from Super Smash Bros. Gets a sound effect for his Thunder Jolt attack. Just listen.
Pikachu!
And here's the comparison.
Pikachu! Pikachu!
Primate Goes Bananas. This episode reveals that Ash won his original hat in a Pokemon League Expo contest, and apparently only 100 of them were given away, so it's a pretty rare hat. Also, jelly-filled donuts. Pokemon Sensation. In this episode, Meowth breaks the 4th wall and realizes that he doesn't have a nose. It even says that the cartoonist forgot to give him one. What a miserable existence. Hypno's Nap Time. This episode reveals what it looks like inside of a Pokeball. And as you can see, it seems very void-like with a misty aroma. But 743 episodes later, we can see what Iris's Dragonite looks like inside of his Pokeball. And as you can see, it seems a lot more digital and futuristic here. Pokemon Fashion Flash. According to the 3rd book of the Kids Pocketbooks Pocket Monster series, the trainer that has a Chansey in this episode is gay, which probably makes him the first gay character in Pokemon. The Punchy Pokemon. It is stated in this episode that the P1 Grand Prix is a competition only for fighting type Pokemon. However, Brock is able to enter his Geodude anyway. Maybe the officials were going by trading card rules, since all Rock and Ground type Pokemon are classified as fighting type in that game. Sparks fly for Magnemite. There's a scene with a very small Raticate and a Fearow in this episode. Just look at them. They're so cute. Dig Those Diglett. This episode could technically be Porygon's debut episode, and one of the very few that it quote-unquote appears in. Because while all the trainers are trying to send out their Pokemon, one of them says Porygon. So one of these Pokeballs here is, well, a Porygon. The Ninja of Poke Showdown. This is the episode where Bulbasaur uses Whirlwind, a move that it cannot learn. The Flame Pokemon Athon. For some reason, when Ponyta starts evolving in this episode, Ash starts glowing too. So does that mean that he also evolved? Maybe this is when he became immortal. Also, this is probably my favorite original episode. The Kangaskhan Kid. In the Japanese version of this episode, Tommy becomes focused on Misty's breasts and literally asks her if he can nurse on them, which causes Misty to hit him. The Legend of Dratini. This is yet another banned episode where this dude literally pulls a weapon on Ash, threatening to unalive him if he doesn't follow the Safari rules, which is pretty extreme. The Bridge Bike Gang. In this episode, Ash is heard ringing his bicycle bell in this scene. Just listen.
Hurry up, guys!
Which wouldn't be that weird, except for the fact that his bike doesn't even have a bell. So what the heck is he ringing with? His hands? Ditto's Mysterious Mansion. When Ash and his friends mimic Team Rocket's motto, Duplica accidentally messes up a line and says this.
To ignite all peoples within our nation.
She literally says to ignite all people within our nation. So Duplica wants to see the world burn confirmed. Cyber Soldier Porygon. On September 19th, 2020, the official Pokemon Twitter account posted this, which says Porygon did nothing wrong, which of course sparked a lot of controversy and was immediately deleted, since this episode caused a lot of epileptic children to have seizures. Holiday Hijinks. In the Japanese version of the special, when all the Jinx use Psywave, they all chant Psycho instead of the Japanese names. Just listen. And this is a reference to the fact that Jinx are stated to speak a similar language to humans, since the move Psywave is called Psycho Wave in Japanese. So no way out. This episode marks the last time we ever see Pikachu's Pokeball in the anime. Pikachu's Goodbye. When this episode first aired in Japan, the host of the TV station had a 3-minute explanation of what happened after the Porygon episode, and warned viewers to watch TV in a brightly lit area at a reasonable distance, which is pretty interesting. The battling Eevee brothers. It is implied in one scene in this episode that if an Eevee is evolved using more than one stone, it would become very dangerous, which is very interesting. I wonder what would happen. Wake Up Snorlax. This random hippie from this episode apparently owns 7 Snorlax, which is pretty wild, especially given how hard it was for Ash to catch merely one of them, and the fact that his initial Pokeball just bounced off of it. Showdown at Dark City. In this episode, it is revealed that both Electabuzz and Scyther hate the color red, which is pretty funny and ironic because they're both exclusive to Pokemon Red. The March of the Executor Squad. The character in this episode, Melvin, is considered to be a failed magician, but his real magic trick is the fact that he's able to hold on to his army of the Executor, which from the scene right here is way more than 6 Pokemon. The problem with Paris. This episode reveals that there's even a weaker move than Thundershock called Static Bolt. And even this very, very weak move knocks out this pathetic Paris. The Song of Jigglypuff. If you watched my Shiny Pokemon Explained video, you know that Jigglypuff from the anime inspired his shiny, since it has green eyes. So technically the Who's That Pokemon in the English episode featured the first and only shiny Pokemon. Also, fun fact, they've only featured shiny Pokemon a mere 8 times in the entirety of the Japanese anime, with the Pokemon being Noctile, Druddigon, Dragonair, Phantom, Crobat, Magearna, Vikavolt, and Guzzlord. Attack of the Prehistoric Pokemon. In this episode, a Kabutops is unaffected by Pikachu's Electric-type move, even though it should be super effective because of this water type. And this led to several people, including myself, believing that Rock is immune to Electric, just like Ground. A Chansey Operation. Porygon makes his first English appearance in this episode, but only in a transition scene. And this is one of the very few times that we see Porygon in the anime, due to the seizure episode. Also, the doctor in this episode is based on George Clooney, from the show ER, which is pretty random. Holy Matrimony. This episode reveals that before James joined Team Rocket, he flunked out of Pokemon Tech and was part of a bicycle gang, which is really interesting because both those trainer classes exist in the games. So near yet so far-fetched. This is the last episode where voice actor Nicholas James Tate provides a voice for the Pokedex, and they even give a canonical reason to why the Pokedex voice changes. Just listen.
Once upgraded, your Pokedex will have an updated database and even a new voice.
And if you're wondering, here's the old voice of the Pokedex.
Farfetch'd, a wild duck Pokemon.
And then the new voice.
Togepi, an egg Pokemon. Specific information about this Pokemon is still unavailable.
Who gets to keep Togepi? In this episode, Brock opens his eyes for the first time. Just look at him. He's finally doing it. I'm so proud. Bulbasaur's Mysterious Garden. This is the first episode where we see a Pokemon stop itself from evolving. And honestly, I don't blame Bulbasaur because it was probably traumatized after seeing how Jurassic Charmander changed after it evolved. It went from being friends to a maniac. Princess vs. Princess. This is the episode where this scene happens with Jesse's Lickitung, which sparked a lot of memes. The Perfect Hero. The car that Team Rocket drives this episode is actually based on the Suzuki Wagon R car, which is very popular in Japan, and I saw them a lot myself, and I even took a picture of a few of them. And I'm going to assume they chose this car because of the random R in the name. The Case of the K9 Caper. Surprisingly, Team Rocket does not blast off in this episode, but rather just run away. Well, Jesse and James at least, and they do it in heels. Pokemon Paparazzi. This episode marks the first and very few times that we see a human character get unalived on screen, where Ash mistakes Todd's camera for a sniper. Although this is Ash's imagination again, so this might not count as well. Man, Ash has a wicked imagination. The Ultimate Test. A random green Weedle appeared in this episode, as you can see right here, and this was before Shiny Pokemon even existed. And interestingly, Shiny Weedle was lime green in Generation 2 only. So basically this was an unintended foreshadowing. Also, Jigglypuff seen from above. The Breeding Center Secret. This is the first episode that Butch and Cassidy appear in. And funny enough, Butch had an ongoing joke where people would always forget his name. They would call him Bilf, Bilge, Buzz, Bill, Bob, Butch, Buffy, Butcher, Chuck, Clutch, Futch, Hooch, Hutch, Mitch, or Patch. And this got to Butch so much that he literally retired from Team Rocket to become a baker. So now he's Butch the Baker. Riddle me this. This is the infamous episode where Ash told Pikachu to aim at Rhydon's horn and use Thunderbolt, even though Rhydon is a ground-type Pokemon and eventually gets a Lightning Rod ability, which makes it double immune to Electric. But somehow it worked, so good for Ash. Volcanic Panic. In this episode, Staryu and Squirtle keep other Pokemon cool by spraying water on them, which included Brock's Geodude and Onix, who are called weak to this typing, so they are literally playing with death. Beach Blank Out Blastoise. This episode revealed that Pokemon have different languages across different species, since Pikachu couldn't understand Wartortle when it was talking to it, and needed Squirtle to translate. The Misty Mermaid. In this episode, it is revealed that Psyduck, a water-type Pokemon, is unable to breathe underwater, or even swim, which is kind of sad. Epic fail. Clefairy Tales. This is the last episode to be released before Pokemon Yellow, which means that all anime references in the game ends here. The Battle of the Badge. This is the infamous episode where Gary shows off his 10 gym badges, which confirm that there are more gyms in the Kanto region. And if you look closely, there are only 3 gym badges that are recognizable, which means there are at least 7 different gyms that we don't know about. So maybe there's a gym for every type in the Kanto region. It's Mr. Mime time. There's a typo in the title card for this episode. It really reads, it's Mr. Mimi time. Showdown at the Poke Coral. In this episode, Professor Oak reveals that the 2 other trainers who left Pallet Town failed as trainers, because they lacked necessary skills. So basically Bulbasaur and Charmander were wasted. Poor Ash. The Evolution Solution. This episode reveals that Professor Westwood is the one responsible for programming the Pokedex and writing all its entries. So next time you see a dex entry that don't make any sense, blame this guy. The P. Kahuna. Ash and his friends wear different clothing in this episode. I wonder what athlete is number 91 in the Pokemon world. Gotta be a basketball player. Make room for Gloom. This character mentions that she taught her Gloom the move Solar Beam after reading about it in a magazine, which might be the closest thing that we'll ever see in the anime when it comes to TMs. And additionally, her Gloom knew Double Team, which is also a move that can only be learned via TM. Lights, Camera, Quickshen. This episode reveals that the award for the best director is called the Golden Growlithe Award, even though it's clearly an Arcanine. Also, Cleavage Spielbunk. That's his name. Go West Young Meowth. This episode states that Meowth don't normally stand on their hind legs. But this is clearly not true because every Meowth seen in the games, manga, and most of the anime stand on their hind legs. So basically it's the opposite. The rare Meowth stand on all 4s. To master the unexpected. This episode showcases how actually giant Bruno's Onix is. Because if you look at the scene right here, Bruno's Onix is nearly as tall as a steep hill. And see those little rocks tumbling down? Well, in the previous shot, those rocks are as big as Jesse and James. So this is one giant Pokemon, or a shapeshifter. The Ancient Puzzle of Pokemonopolis. This episode shows possibly the oldest Pokeballs that exist, which are the Dark Device, Unearthly Urn and Spoon, and the Ancient Paintbrush. And I covered all these in my One Fact for Every Pokeball video right here. Bad to the Bone. This is the first episode where we see Pokemon cards, but for some reason they were changed to pictures of James in the English version, probably due to trademarks or something. All Fired Up. This is the debut episode of the character Charles Goodshow, who is the president of the Pokemon League. And even though we never see him battle, I wouldn't be surprised if he is the strongest trainer in the Pokemon anime, because how else are you going to be the president of multiple Pokemon leagues? We even see him sitting with trainers like Cynthia. Round 1, begin. This episode showcases how powerful Ash's Kingler is, and might prove that it's his strongest Pokemon ever, because it was able to take down 3 Pokemon by itself in a league tier battle, with one of the Pokemon being a grass type. And not only that, it literally uses 8 different moves in this battle too, which is just insane. And keep in mind, this is the same Kirby that was defeated by a stick, and was never trained ever. Fire and Ice. Misty talks about hit points in this episode. Just listen.
Wait, Ash! Cloyster should be losing hit points too!
Which is interesting because HP is never mentioned again in the entirety of the anime after this. The 4th round rumble. Ash's opponent Jeanette in this episode is announced to have come from Crimson City, which is a city that we never heard of and is never mentioned again in the entirety of the anime. Maybe this is one of the cities that Gary got one of his badges from, possibly the Dragon-type badge. A Friend Indeed. This episode reveals how the Pokemon League determines their seeding. Basically, each trainer fishes a Magikarp that has a number on it, which is really random. Friend and foe alike. In this episode, Jesse impersonates Richie's voice and says the most hilarious thing to Misty. Just listen.
You're that stuck-up little big mouth missy, are ya? Listen, lame-o, I didn't call to talk to you. Just get Ash and get lost.
Also, cardboard cutout of Richie exists. Friends to the End. The 3rd place winner of the Indigo League in this episode looks suspiciously similar to Gone from Hunter x Hunter. And what's uncanny about this is that this episode aired the same year that Hunter x Hunter debuted, so it's probably a sneak peek. And finally, the last episode of the original anime, Pallet Party Panic. This is the infamous episode where Ash promises Pidgeot that he will return, but literally never does. And even in Pokemon Journeys, when Ash is reunited with all of his Pokemon, it's Pidgeot who returns to Ash, and not the other way around. How dare you? And be sure to watch my One Fact for Every Pokeball video right here.